Number 1. Ronald Joseph Dominique. Ronald Joseph Dominique was born on January 9, 1964 in Thibodaux, Louisiana. He grew up poor, lived in trailer parks, and spent most of his adult life moving between relatives' homes, apartments, and trailers across southern Louisiana. He did not live in isolation. He lived among families, neighbors, and communities where people saw him regularly. From 1997 to 2006, Dominique murdered at least 23 men and teenage boys across 6 Louisiana parishes, including St. Charles, Jefferson, Lafourche, Terrebonne, Iberville, and St. James. Many of his victims lived near one another, disappeared from the same neighborhoods, or were last seen only blocks from where they lived. Dominique did not abduct victims from distant locations. He encountered them locally, on neighborhood streets, near trailer parks, outside homes, at nearby bars, or while driving through familiar areas. Several victims lived within close proximity to each other, and some lived close to Dominique himself. His method was consistent. He approached victims in person, often offering alcohol, drugs, money, or a place to stay. In several cases, he claimed his girlfriend wanted group sex. Once a victim agreed to go with him, Dominique took them either to his trailer or his vehicle. There, he restrained them, raped them, and strangled them. He then transported the bodies and dumped them in rural areas, canals, ditches, or fields, often within the same parish where the victim lived. Dominique's first confirmed victim, 19-year-old David Mitchell, was killed in July 1997. Mitchell had been picked up near his grandmother's home after attending a family birthday party. His body was found 2 days later in a ditch. Authorities initially ruled the death an accidental drowning, despite evidence that Mitchell was found with his pants lowered and water levels too shallow to explain drowning. His father objected to the ruling, but the case was closed. In December 1997, Dominique killed Gary Pierre in St. Charles Parish. Pierre lived in the area and was found fully clothed with no obvious trauma. Again, no homicide was officially declared. In July 1998, Dominique killed 38-year-old Larry Ranson, a local vagrant. This was the first confirmed case where Dominique bound his victim before killing him. Throughout 1998 and 1999, Dominique murdered multiple victims in Kenner and Metairie, including 16-year-old Joseph Brown, 18-year-old Bruce Williams, and 21-year-old Manuel Reed. Investigators later determined that Brown, Pierre, and Angel Mejia all lived close to one another, a fact that went unnoticed at the time. In several cases, Dominique disposed of bodies less than a mile from where the victims were last seen. One victim's body was dumped in a dumpster in an industrial area near residential neighborhoods. Another was left on a street after a dumpster was found full. In October 2000, Dominique murdered Kenneth Randolph Jr., a 20-year-old who lived near him in the same trailer park. Randolph had been inside Dominique's trailer before. His body was later found partially naked in a nearby field.
By 2002, Dominique had moved with his sister to Bayou Bleu, a rural community where neighbors lived in close quarters. During this period, he continued killing. One victim, Datrell Woods, lived nearby and was known in the community. Woods' death was initially ruled accidental due to his asthma, allowing Dominique to continue operating freely. In 2004 and 2005, Dominique murdered multiple victims who lived in the same areas, including men who were homeless or temporarily staying with friends. In at least one case, the victim's disappearance was not immediately reported, delaying investigation. One of Dominique's victims, Leon Lorette, had lived with 2 other murder victims. At one point, Lorette was even considered a suspect in another victim's death, diverting attention away from Dominique entirely. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Dominique murdered Chris DeVille, who was trying to leave Napoleonville. DeVille's remains were discovered weeks later in a reed field. Dominique's final confirmed victim, Christopher Sutterfield, had been dating him. Sutterfield's family and friends confirmed he had last been seen with a man driving a black SUV, Dominique's vehicle. Still, no immediate arrest followed. For nearly 9 years, Dominique remained free despite repeated warning signs. A man escaped his trailer in 1996 and told neighbors Dominique had raped and attempted to kill him. Multiple victims were found bound. DNA evidence was present, but not immediately connected. Victims lived near each other and disappeared from the same local areas. Dominique was finally exposed in late 2006 when a man reported Dominique attempting to restrain him in his trailer. DNA testing linked Dominique to semen found on earlier victims. He was arrested at a homeless shelter. After his arrest, Dominique confessed to 23 murders, providing details only the killer could know. He admitted he killed victims to eliminate witnesses. He showed no remorse. In 2008, Dominique pleaded guilty and received multiple life sentences without parole, avoiding the death penalty. The FBI later stated his case was one of the most significant serial murder cases in the United States due to its duration and victim count. Ronald Dominique did not stalk strangers from afar. He lived where his victims lived. He killed people who disappeared from their own streets. He operated for years while neighbors, families, and communities remained unaware. He was not hidden. He was present.
Number 2. Shaun Vincent Gillis. Shaun Vincent Gillis was born on June 24, 1962 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He spent his entire life in southern Louisiana and committed all of his known murders in and around Baton Rouge. He did not travel to kill. He did not leave the state. Every murder occurred within the same metropolitan area where he lived, worked, and moved daily. Gillis was raised by his mother and grandparents after his father abandoned the family. He grew up locally and remained in Baton Rouge as an adult. His criminal history began as a teenager with minor offenses, including traffic violations, DUI, drug possession, and contempt of court. None of these arrests suggested escalation toward homicide. His first known murder occurred in March 1994. Gillis entered the apartment of 82-year-old Ann Bryan, a resident of St. James Place, an exclusive retirement community in Baton Rouge. Bryan lived where residents expected safety and familiarity. Gillis attempted to sexually assault her. When she screamed, he slit her throat and stabbed her approximately 50 times. He left her body inside her residence. The murder occurred where Bryan lived, not in an isolated area. After this killing, Gillis remained free for years. In January 1999, Gillis murdered 29-year-old Catherine Ann Hall. Her body was later found discarded, but Gillis had encountered her locally. That same year, he began stalking another victim in her own neighborhood. In May 1999, Gillis noticed 52-year-old Hardy Schmidt while she was jogging in South Baton Rouge. He did not attack immediately. Instead, he spent 3 weeks driving through her neighborhood, watching her routine. On May 30th, he struck her with his car on Quail Run Drive, a residential street. He restrained her with plastic wrap, raped her, and murdered her. He kept her body in the trunk of his white Chevy Cavalier for 2 days before dumping it in a bayou in St. James Parish. The attack began and ended with Gillis operating openly in residential areas without interference. Between 1999 and 2004, Gillis murdered 6 more women, all within the Baton Rouge region. Joyce Williams, 36. Lillian Robinson, 52. Marilyn Nevels, 38. Johnny Mae Williams, 45. Donna Bennett Johnston, 43. Each victim lived, worked, or moved through areas Gillis routinely traveled. He encountered them through proximity, not chance. Some were attacked near where they lived, others were transported short distances before being killed. Gillis often used nylon tie wraps or plastic restraints. He raped his victims, strangled them, and in several cases mutilated their bodies after death. He admitted to cutting, dismembering, and removing body parts to keep as souvenirs. His final victim, Donna Bennett Johnston, was murdered in February 2004. He raped her, strangled her with a nylon tie wrap, and then mutilated her body extensively. He slashed her breasts, removed a nipple, gouged out a tattoo, and severed her arm at the elbow. Her body was dumped in a drainage canal near Ben Hur Road, south of Louisiana State University, an area surrounded by homes, students, and daily traffic.
After her murder, Gillis returned to his residence. Police later discovered 45 digital photographs of Johnston's mutilated body on his computer, including images taken in the trunk of his car. Investigators also found photographs of other victims and body parts kept inside his home. These crimes occurred while Gillis lived among the public, stored evidence where he slept, and continued daily life without suspicion. His arrest came not from a witness, but from forensic evidence. Tire tracks near Johnston's body matched a specific tire model sold in limited numbers in Baton Rouge. Police narrowed the list to fewer than 100 possible vehicles. DNA obtained from Gillis matched biological evidence recovered from multiple victims. He was arrested on April 29, 2004. After his arrest, Gillis confessed with little resistance. He admitted to all 8 murders and described them in detail. He referred to himself as pure evil and stated that he sometimes killed without knowing why. In letters written after his arrest, he expressed regret not for killing, but for the mutilation. During trial proceedings, prosecutors introduced the photographs Gillis kept inside his home. These images were taken while he was living freely in the same community as his victims' families. Gillis was initially charged with first-degree murder for 3 victims and additional charges related to ritualistic acts. In 2008, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment after juries deadlocked on the death penalty. He later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in another case. Shaun Vincent Gillis remains incarcerated at Louisiana State Penitentiary. He did not operate in secrecy far from society. He killed where he lived. He stalked victims in their own neighborhoods. He stored evidence in his home. He went undetected for a decade. 8 women were murdered by a man who never left Baton Rouge.
Number 3. Derek Todd Lee. Derek Todd Lee was born on November 5, 1968 in St. Francisville, Louisiana. He spent his entire life in small towns and residential communities across the Baton Rouge region. He lived in houses, mobile homes, and rental properties. He worked construction jobs that required him to move through neighborhoods daily. He was not transient. He was repeatedly present in the same local areas where his victims lived. Long before the murders began, Lee had a documented history of prowling, peeping, stalking, and unlawful entry into occupied homes. Police reports from the 1980s and 1990s show repeated complaints from residents who caught Lee watching women through windows or attempting to enter houses. These incidents were not isolated. They occurred across multiple neighborhoods. Lee committed at least 7 confirmed murders between 1998 and 2003, primarily in Baton Rouge, Zachary, Addis, and Lafayette. The majority of these attacks began inside the victim's home. There was often no sign of forced entry, indicating compliance, deception, or familiarity. His first known victim, Randy Jane Meebrewer, age 28, disappeared from her home in Zachary, Louisiana on the night of April 18, 1998. Lee had previously prowled around her house during nighttime walks. On the night of her disappearance, Lee drove to her residence, entered her bedroom, and violently attacked her. He dragged her outside, raped her in the driveway, and removed her body from the scene. Her keys and dumbbells were missing. Her body was never recovered. Her 3-year-old son slept inside the house while the crime occurred. Investigators focused on her ex-husband for years, despite Lee's prior stalking behavior in the same area. On September 23, 2001, Gina Wilson Green, age 41, was murdered inside her home on Stamford Avenue in Baton Rouge. Green had expressed fear about someone watching her. She placed pepper spray near her windows. Lee entered her home, raped her, strangled her, and placed her body on her bed. Her cell phone was later found discarded in a nearby alley, indicating Lee remained in the area after the murder. On January 14, 2002, Geraldine Barr DeSoto, age 21, was murdered in her home in Atis, Louisiana. Lee knocked on her door and asked to use the phone. Once inside, he struck her from behind. DeSoto fought back, retrieved her husband's shotgun, and attempted to escape. Lee overtook her and stabbed her repeatedly, slashing her throat. He stomped on her body before leaving. Her husband discovered the body and initially became the prime suspect due to scene contamination, further delaying focus on Lee. On May 31, 2002, Charlotte Murray Pace was murdered in her apartment on Charlotte Avenue, Baton Rouge. She had moved in only 2 days earlier. Lee entered while she was alone. He raped her and stabbed her 81 times with a screwdriver during a prolonged struggle. Pace had previously lived near Gina Green, and both women jogged in the same park near LSU. The geographic overlap was not immediately connected. On July 9, 2002, Diane Alexander, age 46, survived an attack at her home in Breaux Bridge. Lee knocked on her door claiming to be doing construction work for a nearby family and asked for help locating an address. He engaged in casual conversation, creating a sense of familiarity. When Alexander attempted to retrieve items for him, Lee forced his way inside. He attempted to rape her, beat her repeatedly, and strangled her with an electrical cord. Alexander's adult son entered the home during the assault, forcing Lee to flee. Alexander survived severe injuries and later provided investigators with a description of Lee and his vehicle. Her testimony became critical. On July 12, 2002, Pamela Piglia Kinnamore, age 44, was abducted from her home on Briarwood Place in Baton Rouge. Lee entered through an unlocked front door while she was bathing. She was beaten, tied, and kidnapped. Multiple motorists later reported seeing her inside Lee's vehicle while she was still alive. She was raped and murdered at Whiskey Bay. Her throat was cut so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Lee kept a silver toe ring from her body and later gave it to his wife. On November 21, 2002, Danae Colum, age 23, was abducted from her home in Lafayette. Her car and belongings were found near a cemetery. Her body was discovered days later in a wooded area. She had been raped and beaten to death. On March 3, 2003, Carrie Lynn Yoder, age 26, was abducted from her home on Dodson Avenue in Baton Rouge. She was raped, beaten, and strangled. Her body was dumped in Whiskey Bay, the same area used in earlier murders. Across these crimes, Lee showed consistent behaviors: approaching victims at their homes, entering without visible forced entry, removing phones, using deception and false assistance, operating within short distances of his own movements. Despite repeated warnings, Lee was overlooked for years due to an incorrect offender profile that assumed the killer was white. Thousands of DNA samples were taken from white men while Lee continued to live freely in the same neighborhoods. Lee was finally identified after DNA evidence recovered from victims was matched to a sample taken in a previous investigation. Police in Zachary recognized his name from multiple peeping incidents. A composite sketch based on Diane Alexander's description further narrowed the search. In May 2003, Lee fled Louisiana after submitting a voluntary DNA sample. He was captured 5 days later at a motel in Atlanta. Lee was convicted in separate trials for the murders of Geraldine DeSoto and Charlotte Murray Pace. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole and later death. He spent 12 years on death row at Louisiana State Penitentiary before dying of heart disease on January 21, 2016. Derek Todd Lee did not target isolated locations. He entered homes. He was reported before the murders. He was known to police. Every confirmed victim was attacked where she lived or just beyond her front door.
Number 4. Nathaniel Robert Code, Jr. Nathaniel Robert Code, Jr. was born on March 12, 1956, in Louisiana. From an early age, he exhibited behaviors that later investigators would recognize as warning signs. Family members reported episodes where Code would abruptly stop speaking and stare blankly for extended moments before continuing, as if dissociating. During adolescence, he was accused of setting animals on fire. He failed 9th grade and dropped out of school. His childhood was unstable. His parents divorced 6 months after his birth. He was raised by relatives and later lived with his uncle, Johnny Boyd. In 1971, after an argument, Boyd shot Code 4 times. Code survived, ran several blocks, collapsed in the street, and identified Boyd to police. Boyd was arrested. This violent domestic history followed Code into adulthood. In June 1975, Code raped a 20-year-old woman after breaking into her residence. He was charged with aggravated rape and burglary. He pleaded guilty to attempted aggravated rape and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was released early in January 1984 for good behavior. Within months of his release, the killings began. Code did not attack strangers in public spaces. He entered homes at night. He targeted people where they lived. He operated inside residential neighborhoods. On August 31, 1984, Code entered the home of Deborah Ann Ford, age 25, in Shreveport. He gained entry by pulling open a bathroom window screen. Inside the house, he confronted her, bound her hands, gagged her mouth, stabbed her repeatedly, and slit her throat. Her body was left face down on a sofa. There was no immediate suspect. Police described the case as a whodunit. Code remained undetected. Less than a year later, he escalated. In the early morning hours of July 19, 1985, Code entered a residence on 72nd Street in the Cedar Grove neighborhood of Shreveport. 4 people lived inside. Code killed all of them. Billy Joe Harris, age 28, was shot twice in the head and twice in the chest while sleeping. A pillow was used to muffle the shots. His throat was then slashed. His hands and ankles were bound with shoelaces. Jerry Culbert, age 25, was shot once in the head while asleep. Carletha Culbert, age 15, was bound with an electrical cord, gagged with duct tape, raped, and had her throat cut so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Her shorts were inside out, indicating sexual assault. Vivian Cheney, age 34, was beaten, bound with a telephone cord, manually strangled, and then drowned in a bathtub. Blood from her daughter was found on her dress, indicating she was alive and aware during Carletha's murder. 2 children, ages 7 and 10, were present in the home and survived by hiding. Police described the crime scene as one of the most vicious they had ever encountered. FBI profiler John Douglas later stated that the murders showed clear patterns of domination, restraint, and control, the same traits present in Code's earlier and later crimes. Code continued killing inside homes. On August 5, 1987, he murdered his own grandfather, William T. Code, age 73. He stabbed him 13 times, bound him, and gagged him inside his residence. 2 children present in the home, Joe Robinson Jr., age 12, and Eric Williams, age 8, were also bound, gagged, and strangled to death. Investigators immediately suspected someone close to the victims due to the level of access and control. That suspicion was correct. Code was also linked through evidence and behavioral analysis to additional residential murders in Shreveport during the same period. While not all were formally charged, investigators noted identical methods: nighttime entry, restraint,
gagging, throat injuries, and prolonged control inside the home. After the 1987 murders, police interviewed Code as a routine contact due to his relationship with one of the victims. During questioning, he made incriminating statements while simultaneously denying responsibility. His fingerprints were taken and matched to evidence recovered from multiple crime scenes, including the Cedar Grove murders and Deborah Ford's killing. Code was arrested and charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. At trial, prosecutors demonstrated that Code stalked victims at night, often riding a bicycle through residential areas. Witnesses testified to seeing him with blood on his arms shortly after the Cedar Grove murders. More than 450 pieces of evidence were presented. The jury took only 1 hour to convict him of 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. Even after conviction, Code denied responsibility, claiming one person could not kill 4 people in one house. Appeals failed. His sentence was upheld. Nathaniel Robert Code Jr. did not commit crimes of opportunity. He entered homes, he restrained victims, he controlled families inside their own residences. He was not a stranger passing through. He operated where people lived. He killed behind closed doors.
Number 5. Todd Kelvin Wessinger. Todd Kelvin Wessinger was born on November 28, 1967. By the mid-1990s, he was living in Baton Rouge, moving through the same streets daily, riding a bicycle through local neighborhoods and frequenting places where people knew his face. He was not anonymous. He was familiar. On November 19, 1995, Wessinger committed a mass shooting during an armed robbery at a Baton Rouge restaurant where he had previously worked. The victims were not strangers. They were former co-workers who recognized him immediately. Wessinger arrived at the restaurant on a bicycle, the same way he had countless times before. He entered carrying a .380 semi-automatic pistol. There was no forced entry, no resistance at the door. The bartender, Mike Armentor, greeted him casually. Seconds later, Wessinger shot Armentor twice in the back. Armentor collapsed with severe abdominal injuries, but survived. Inside the restaurant, Wessinger encountered dishwasher Alvin Ricks. He held Ricks at gunpoint and attempted to execute him by shooting him in the head. The gun jammed. As Ricks ran, Wessinger attempted to fire again, misfiring while aiming at his leg. Ricks escaped across the street and immediately identified Wessinger to police. The shooting continued. Restaurant manager Stephanie Gazzardo, age 27, attempted to call police from the office. Wessinger pointed the gun at her. She pleaded for her life. He shot her anyway, killing her inside the workplace she managed. Wessinger then stole approximately $7,000 from the office safe. He continued searching the restaurant. Inside a cooler, Wessinger found David Breakwell, age 46, a cook who had worked alongside him in the past. Breakwell pleaded for mercy. Wessinger shot him. Breakwell later died while being transported to the hospital. Wessinger fled the scene on his bicycle. This was not a random robbery. It was targeted. He knew the layout. He knew where people would hide. He knew who would be there. Police arrested Wessinger 9 days later in Garland, Texas. He was extradited to Louisiana and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. At trial, prosecutors emphasized that the victims recognized him immediately. There was no mask, no disguise. He relied on familiarity to gain access.
In 1997, after a 2-day trial, a Baton Rouge jury found Wessinger guilty on both counts. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. He was formally sentenced to death in September 1997. What followed was decades of appeals. Wessinger argued that his trial counsel failed to present mitigating evidence, including claims of childhood abuse and alleged brain damage from a pediatric stroke. Courts repeatedly rejected these arguments. In 2012, his execution was scheduled,
then stayed. In 2015, a federal judge vacated his death sentence, citing ineffective counsel. In 2017, the Fifth Circuit reinstated it. In 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his appeals. Throughout the appeals process, the families of the victims consistently opposed clemency. Stephanie Guzardo's father repeatedly testified before lawmakers, recounting how his daughter begged for her life before being shot. In 2023, Wessinger sought clemency alongside dozens of other Louisiana death row inmates. His petition was denied. A clemency hearing was eventually granted, where his attorneys again argued diminished capacity. On November 27, 2023, clemency was denied. Wessinger remains on Louisiana's death row. Todd Wessinger did not break into a stranger's home. He walked into a place where people recognized him. He was greeted by name. He was trusted for seconds longer than he deserved. He used familiarity as cover. He relied on routine. He killed people who knew him. That is what made him dangerous.
Number 6. Jerry Gelpi. Jerry Gelpi was 42 years old in February 2021. He lived in an apartment building in Old Jefferson, Louisiana, in the 400 block of Highway Drive. His apartment was directly beneath the apartment of Charles Davis, a 68-year-old man who lived alone on the second floor. Gelpi did not break into a random residence. He walked upstairs into his neighbor's home. Charles Davis had been physically weakened for nearly a year before his death. In April 2020, Davis contracted COVID-19 and spent 3 months hospitalized. While he was in the hospital, the virus killed his live-in girlfriend. Davis survived, but the damage was permanent. He lost more than 70 pounds, required supplemental oxygen, and was undergoing long-term rehabilitation. Despite this, Davis continued living independently. He rode his bicycle to work. He kept his routine. He trusted his surroundings. On the night of February 9, 2021, Jerry Gelpi gained access to Davis's apartment. Investigators later determined that Gelpi entered Davis's unit and confronted him near the bathroom doorway. What followed was a violent struggle. The sink in the bathroom was ripped from the wall. During the altercation, Gelpi stabbed Davis in the neck. Davis was either pushed or fell into the bathtub. Gelpi followed him. Inside the bathtub, Gelpi stabbed Charles Davis at least 16 times. Davis suffered defensive wounds on his right hand, indicating he was conscious and attempting to fight back. His body was found curled into a fetal position, fully clothed inside the tub. After the attack, Gelpi went to the kitchen sink and washed the blood from his hands. Surveillance footage later showed that exactly 7 minutes passed between Gelpi entering Davis's apartment and returning to his own unit downstairs. Davis's wallet was missing. The next morning, Davis's daughter went to his apartment after he failed to answer phone calls. She found the front door unlocked. Inside, she discovered her father's body in the bathtub. Detectives from the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office began canvassing the apartment building. Surveillance cameras showed a person leaving Gelpi's apartment at 1:27 a.m., then returning at 1:34 a.m. carrying a bag. When questioned, Gelpi denied involvement. He initially claimed he had never been inside Davis's apartment. He attempted to redirect suspicion by naming a homeless man as a possible suspect. At no point did he mention mental illness or delusions. Then, investigators reviewed Gelpi's criminal history. In September 2020, Gelpi was arrested in Kenner after confronting 2 young men at a Walmart. When the men asked him to step back due to COVID concerns, Gelpi struck one of them without provocation. During the altercation, he brandished a knife and threatened to stab them. He fled only after realizing he was being recorded. In 2013, in Springfield, Ohio, Gelpi committed a knife-point robbery during a shoplifting incident. He threatened to stab a loss prevention officer and escaped. He was convicted of felony robbery. His DNA profile was entered into the national database. That history became critical.
Later, in February 2021, detectives received a DNA hit. Gelpi's DNA was found under Charles Davis's fingernails and on the kitchen faucet used to wash blood from the killer's hands. An arrest warrant was issued. Deputies returned to the apartment complex and found Gelpi arriving on a bicycle. He was carrying a knife. Inside his apartment, investigators recovered 5 tactical knives. A digital forensic search of Gelpi's computer revealed browser searches for knife-fighting techniques and instructions on stabbing people in the kidneys, heart, and lungs. Only after his arrest did Gelpi begin claiming mental illness. He pleaded not guilty by reason of innocency. At trial, Gelpi testified that he believed he was the Son of God and claimed Charles Davis was the strongest demon he had ever encountered. He pointed at detectives in the courtroom and accused them of being demons as well. Prosecutors dismantled the claim. Doctors from the state mental hospital in Jackson, Louisiana, testified that Gelpi showed no genuine signs of psychosis during evaluation. They concluded he was malingering, deliberately fabricating symptoms. A separate forensic psychiatrist determined Gelpi understood right from wrong at the time of the murder. The evidence supported that conclusion. Gelpi waited until late at night. He cleaned blood from the scene. He disposed of his clothing. He threw the murder weapon into the Mississippi River. He lied to police. Those actions demonstrated awareness, planning, and concealment. Further evidence showed a pattern of deception. After a previous arrest, Gelpi had bragged in an email about lying to a judge to obtain leniency. During his Navy enlistment years earlier, he faked mental illness to secure a discharge. The jury deliberated 24 minutes. Jerry Gelpi was convicted of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. The death penalty was not sought. Under Louisiana law, the sentence is life imprisonment without parole. Jerry Gelpi did not stalk a stranger. He did not force his way into a random home. He walked upstairs. He attacked a man weakened by illness. He killed someone who lived directly above him. He was not an outsider. He was the neighbor.
Number 7. The Jeff Davis 8. Between 2005 and 2009, 8 women were found dead in Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana. Their bodies were discovered in canals, ditches, swamps, and roadside waterways surrounding the town of Jennings. No one has ever been convicted for their murders. The victims were not strangers to one another. They lived near each other. They knew the same people. They moved through the same small community. The first body was found on May 20, 2005. A fisherman discovered Loretta Lewis, age 28, floating in a river. Her death was ruled a homicide. Loretta was known in the area and connected by family and relationships to several people who would later become central to the case. Over the next 4 years, 7 more women were found dead. Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson, 30. Kristen Gary Lopez, 21. Whitney Dubois, 26. Laconia Muggy Brown, 23. Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno, 24. Brittany Gary, 17. Nicole Goyori, 26. Most of their bodies were recovered in advanced stages of decomposition, making forensic determination of cause of death difficult or impossible. In 2 cases, Patterson and Brown, their throats were found to be slit. In the remaining cases, investigators suspected asphyxia or other violent causes, but decomposition prevented certainty. The women shared multiple connections. Several were related by blood. Several lived together shortly before their deaths. Most knew one another personally. They also shared vulnerabilities, poverty, substance abuse, histories of sex work, and mental health struggles. They were not isolated individuals. They were part of the same small social network inside Jennings. Another critical connection later emerged. Many of the women had served as police informants. They provided information about local drug activity, sometimes about each other, to law enforcement in Jefferson Davis Parish. One of the most controversial events tied to the case occurred in 2005, the same year the bodies began appearing. A drug dealer named Leonard Crochet was shot and killed by police during an encounter. A Louisiana State Police investigation later concluded that Crochet was unarmed when he was shot. Despite this, a grand jury declined to bring charges against law enforcement. Multiple people connected to the Jeff Davis 8 were present at or had knowledge of that shooting, including Kristen Lopez, one of the later victims. Witnesses later told investigators they believed the women were killed because of what they knew about the Crochet shooting. The investigation into the deaths was widely criticized. Crime scenes were delayed or mishandled. In one case, a suspected murder location was not tested for blood until 15 months after the killing. Evidence degraded. Leads went cold. Families reported being ignored or dismissed. In December 2008, a task force was formed involving 14 agencies, including federal, state, and local law enforcement. Publicly, investigators described the case as the work of a serial killer. Others disagreed.
Author Ethan Brown, who spent years investigating the case, argued that the murders were not the work of a single serial offender, but the result of systemic corruption, overlapping relationships, and silence within a small community. Task force documents later revealed witness statements implicating local law enforcement and associates of the sheriff's office. 2 incarcerated women claimed that suspects working with law enforcement disposed of evidence related to Kristen Lopez's murder. The officer who took those statements was later forced out of his position. The allegations were never fully investigated. The sheriff's office chief criminal investigator, Warren Gary, was accused of purchasing a truck believed to have been used to transport a body. No charges were filed. In 2009, the sheriff ordered that every investigator involved in the case submit DNA samples. The results of that testing have never been publicly disclosed. Several suspects were arrested or questioned. Frankie Richard, a local strip club owner and drug dealer, admitted to having sex with many of the victims and was among the last people seen with Kristen Lopez. Witnesses connected him to members of the sheriff's office. He was never convicted in connection with the murders. 2 men were briefly charged in Ernestine Patterson's death, but later released when evidence failed to support prosecution. No one has been held accountable. The bodies were found within miles of one another. The victims lived within the same social circle. They interacted with the same people. They trusted people who knew where they lived. Whoever was responsible did not operate in isolation. They moved through the same community. They blended in. They were already known. The Jeff Davis 8 were not killed by someone passing through. They were killed by someone or multiple people who lived among them. And the truth remains buried. In 1978, an 85-year-old woman named Mary James Peters was living alone in Ouachita Parish, Louisiana. She was blind, she was elderly, she depended on familiarity and routine to survive. On April 4, 1978, someone she did not fear entered her space. This was not a burglary interrupted by panic, it was a sustained, deliberate attack. Mary James Peters was beaten to death inside her home. The weapons were not brought from outside. They were objects already present in the residence. A skillet, a stool, a small television, and a telephone. Each item was used repeatedly. The attacker struck her over and over again. The victim was 85 years old. She was blind. There was no evidence she could meaningfully resist. The injuries were consistent with prolonged violence rather than a single fatal blow. This was not an accidental killing during a struggle, it was a beating.
The motive was robbery. The killer did not enter the home randomly. Access was possible because the victim could not see, could not identify faces, and relied on familiarity. The crime occurred in a setting where the attacker did not need to force entry in a way that would draw attention. That access mattered. After the murder, the attacker left the scene. He was later identified, arrested, tried, and convicted of murder. The case did not hinge on speculation or complex forensic reconstruction. The violence itself was undeniable. The brutality of the killing was a central issue at trial. Prosecutors described the attack as excessive, intentional, and completely disproportionate to the act of theft. The victim's age, blindness, and inability to defend herself were emphasized. The jury was presented with evidence showing that the beating continued well beyond what would have been necessary to incapacitate her. The defendant was convicted of murder. Louisiana sought the death penalty. On September 10, 1984, the convicted killer was executed by electrocution. The execution took place in Louisiana 6 years after the murder. There were no unresolved questions about guilt. There were no claims of mistaken identity. There was no doubt about what had happened inside that home. An elderly, blind woman was beaten to death with objects she lived with every day. This was not a crime committed in the dark by a stranger passing through town. It happened because the victim was vulnerable, because the attacker had access, because familiarity lowered defenses. The home was not a place of safety. Mary James Peters did not die because she fought back. She did not die because she resisted. She died because someone chose violence against someone who could not escape it. The law responded with finality. But the crime itself remains one of the most brutal examples of how proximity and access can become weapons when the person on the other side of the door is no longer safe.